We are in the midst of 13 mitzvahs that are all about purity and impurity. He's not really interested in discussing the details. He's mostly interested in identifying these as mitzvot
lives,
and then saying that they are, explaining how or why they're a mitzvah. I mean, some of these are quite big categories and are very impactful in our lives. Most of them, not so much, because today we don't have sacrifices. But again, he has a whole book where he goes through the details of these laws. He's mainly here identifying them as mitzvahs and then moving on. So we're at mitzvah 100. We're just going to go through them quickly. And then he's got one at the end of it where he talks about it a little bit more. So number 100, that he's commanded us. Hey, Estelle, how are you? That is that he commanded us that a woman after childbirth be impure, and this commandment includes all the regulations of a woman after childbirth. When you look in the Torah portion of Tazria, it's funny. Here it says in the Hebrew parentheses, it says Tazria, which is where she is mentioned. These laws are mentioned. In the English, it says Mitzorah for some reason. But anyways, in Tazria, where it talks about this, you actually see it's a bit complicated. There's what they call days of impurity, days of cleanliness. If there's like a 7-day period and then a 33-day period. If it's a boy, a 14-day period, and then a 66-day period. If it's a girl, and of relative impurity. And then at the end, she brings offerings. We've talked about that. Okay. Number 101. That is that he commanded us that a metzorah be impure. Again, a metzorah is somebody who has tzorat, which is a skin affliction, which used to be translated as leprosy, but is no longer, because it doesn't seem to be Hansen's disease that we recognize, but something perhaps more close to psoriasis. And this commandment includes all the laws of tzorat of a person, that which is pure from it, that which requires quarantine, that which needs shaving, that is shaving the scab along with the quarantine, and that which does not need it, and its other laws, and the nature of its impurity. And again, that's discussed in Tazria. Next, in Mitzvah 102, that he's commanded us to administer the laws of impurity of a garment that is tzorat. Now, this has the same name, tzorat, and spiritually might be in the same category, but obviously it's not psoriasis of clothing. So it's some other kind, perhaps something that we might put in the category of mold, but it's of a particular type and considered a kind of sinister indication. And therefore we are asked to, obviously clothing took a long time to fashion, and they were expensive in those days. And so if there was a potential that they might have to be destroyed, depending on the process. So it was a very serious issue for people if their clothing would get tzaraat. I remember this is not the same thing as household mold, but I know it happened in Israel to my brother. It also happened to my son Shauli. There is a kind of mold that's not uncommon in apartments in Israel that, depending on how they're built, water can seep into the walls, and you can get this mold. So Shauli had a storage closet, and he didn't realize it, and this mold crept in, and he had a backpack and certain other things that he had stored there that were important to him, but they got completely destroyed. And Those are sentimentally important to him. You add on top of that the fact that these are very expensive and take a long time to make in those days. And you could see that it's not quite the same as having something on your person, but it would be considered a difficult and sort of traumatic thing to have to deal with. This command includes all types of impurity of tzara'at of a garment, how they are impure, how they generate impurity, which ones need quarantine or tearing or burning or washing and purification, and the other things that appear in scripture or through the tradition about it. And that's in Tazria as well. And this is that he commanded us that a house that has tzara'at be impure. This commandment includes the various impurities of a house, which one needs to quarantine, or the destruction of some of its walls, or the destruction of all of it, which with what they have become impure, how they become impure. It's possible, these are talking about stone house, it's possible when they say destruction that you're going to have to take it all apart and the stones are going to have to be cast out into something like sort of a hazardous waste dump. The Gemara cites this case, the case of the house with tzara'at, as an example of something that never happened and never will happen. It lists three different cases. This case, the case of the Ben Sorah or Moreh, the rebellious son, and the case of an Ir Hanidachas, which is a city, the majority of its population worshipped idols, which is supposed to be destroyed. The Gemara goes through each one of these and says it never did happen, it never will happen. In each case, there's somebody who disagrees, who says not only, for instance, with the let's say with the house at tzara'at, it said not only was there a case, but I actually saw the stones of this place. Also similarly, not only was there a rebellious son, but I stood by his grave. I saw his grave. So there are several commentaries who suggest that this isn't really an argument, but rather it's an argument in form, but it's not really an argument in content. What it means is technically there was never, let's say, a rebellious son, which means that this case of the rebellious son, which is that they take, after they've determined that this child deserves to come to court, they bring the child to court. His parents bring him to court. This child is a minor who has shown the signs of rebellion, whatever the details might be. And then if it's ruled that this child is a rebellious son, then this child is killed. And so, it's just, it's a very troubling rule. There are some troubling rules in the Torah that are still rules, even if they're troubling. This is one of them. But the Talmud says it never happened and never will happen. That opinion is it never actually happened, that a child was actually killed because it was judged to be a rebellious child. But and so this is the other opinion, there was a child in quotation marks, which is the people of Israel. We are called, we are told in two places, God tells Moshe that Israel is his firstborn son, and we're also told by Moshe in Devarim, Bonim atem l'Hashem Elokecha, your children to Lord your God. So there is a rebellious son, that's us. We were a rebellious son, and we had to go through destruction and exile, which is what we're mourning during these 3 weeks, particularly, and then now these 9 days, according to Ashkenazic custom. By the way, Sephardic custom is there is no 9 days per se. There's what we call the week of Tisha B'Av. So next week, starting Sunday, Sephardic custom is to have the extra degree of mourning. But the issue of not eating meat or drinking wine, they don't have that Sephardic, that custom of the 9 days yet. They have something during the week of Tisha B'Av. When I say Sephardic, I'm assuming it's all Sephardim. It's typically said to be Ashkenazic, to have the 9 days, which began today, and the customs of the 9 days. So we are mourning that, and in a sense, we are the rebellious son. And same thing with the house, which is the house of Tzarat, which also is some kind of, we would, if we saw it, probably call it some kind of mold. But this is not just any mold, it's some kind of mold that again has a sinister meaning. It has a particular nature that is identified by the Kohen, and if it if it fits the criteria, the house has to be destroyed. So according to the opinion that he saw such the stones of such a house, this would be somebody reporting on seeing the stones of the Beis Hamikdash, that our Beit Hamikdash corresponds in some ways to this house. So even though technically there never was a house like that, there was one in metaphorically, and then you would say something, the same kind of thing about the rebellious city, the city of idolaters. That would be Jerusalem, when it was deemed by Hashem to destroy Jerusalem. So in a sense, Jerusalem is the Ir Hanidachat that is being destroyed. So that's how many understand those Gemaras, which would again mean that this particular case, Mitzvah 103, never was and never will be. What's the point of having laws like that if they never were and never will be? First of all, there are notions that are maybe not to be learned literally, but can be extrapolated, like we saw the Gemara do, to help us focus on maybe a larger idea that is represented by the mitzvah. Also, there are some cases which, like let's say you have the Ben Sora Mora case, even though it never happened, having a law like that on the books says something, maybe chilling, but it says something about our values as a nation. There are those who make this argument or explain an argument that was made by Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon in the Gemara. The Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon said that if they were ever on a Sanhedrin that could actually rule on life or death, by the time of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, the Sanhedrin is not ruling on life or death cases. Because they're in the, let's say, they're after the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, they're under Roman control. The Sanhedrin doesn't have the power at that time to have death sentences. But they said that if they had been on a Sanhedrin that could pass, that could decide the death penalty, they would make it so difficult that it never came to be. They'd make such a high bar for testimony that no witness could actually accomplish it. Like, let's say I was the witness and I said something happened at 10 o'clock. Then they'd ask me, how do you know it was 10 o'clock? And I'd say, I was looking at my watch. And they'd say, well, when was the last time you calibrated your watch to make sure that your watch is functioning properly? And I may say, well, actually, I don't know. I maybe it was a couple of days. Well, how do you know that your watch was actually, that when you say 11:02 based on your watch, that it was really 11:02? So, things like that. They could just make the bar for testimony so high that it's not possible for somebody to succeed, and therefore you wouldn't end up with a judgment, a death penalty judgment. So now ask yourself, Rebbe Akiva or Rebbe Tarfon, why is this law in the Torah? If you're going to make it so difficult that there never is a judgment of death, well then how do you explain judgment of death in circumstances like this being on the books? Clearly God wants there to be a death penalty in a case like this. So they might argue, and this is how some explain it, they might argue that having the law on the books already says a great deal about the values of the people. Let's say we're talking about a death penalty for idolatry. So the fact that we have the death penalty on the books already suggests that we consider, being tutored by God, but we consider idolatry to be one of the worst things that a person can do as part of the Jewish people, or as a human in general. One of the worst violations a person can do. The fact that on the books, according to the books, this person should be killed speaks to how severe we consider this offense. Once we've made that point, we might be able to, adjust a little here and adjust a little there, make a big deal out of the trial, but then find a way in the end that this person will get off on a technicality. So the point was made that this is a terrible offense, but we didn't kill the person. Could be a similar kind of thing. And now with all these death penalties, you could say this. As a nation, it's on the books that we consider Shabbos to be so serious that if somebody violates Shabbos, it deserves the death penalty. Now, technically, nobody's going to die, by the court for transgressing Shabbos, but the message has been sent that Shabbos is that important to the Jewish people that it's considered a crime worthy of the death penalty, and so on and so forth. Adultery, something, another example. You've made the point that adultery is that serious. Technicality, where the person's not going to die, but you've had this kind of opportunity to sort of dip into the severity of it. Even nowadays, where there isn't going to be a death penalty, we know that the Torah considers it that serious, and that itself is a kind of testament to the morality of the Jewish people. So you would say something like that over here, you could say. So you have both the option to learn the broader principles that might be reflected in the law, and then you also have the opportunity to say that this is on the books, even if it isn't practically carried out. Next, we have the case of the Zav. I don't know, I think we've talked about the Zav here in this class, but we've talked about the Zav in our other class. The Zav is a male who has a discharge that might be something similar to gonorrhea. It is not connected to a sexual offense in the Torah per se. It's indication of impurity. We did look, oh yeah, we did. Remember, we looked to see if there was any, I don't remember if we did it here or we did it in our Thursday class, to see if there is any underlying, like we had with the Mitzvot, where it was, whenever you hear about Sarat, you'll see commentary talking about Lashon Hara, the terrible, terrible impact of harmful speech that's always connected to Tzarat. And we looked into the Zav to see what might be underlying the Zav, or does there need to be something underlying the Zav? There certainly wasn't a lot of literature about it. There wasn't an assumption that there had to be something underlying it, but we did see that it could be material, like a kind of inappropriate going after materialism was one option that this could be a sign of. Anyways, if the person has one of these emissions and just one, then they are pure for one day. If they have two emissions within 2 days, then this person is impure for 7 days. And if they have three, then this person is impure for 7 days and also has to bring sacrifices at the end of it. And so this was in a category, which we did see together. This was in that category of impurity that was also connected to sacrifices. You had the impurity connected to sacrifices. There were 4 examples of it, I think. One of them was Nazir. If a Nazir becomes impure, they have to bring sacrifices. So they'd wait the period of impurity, and then after the period of impurity, they go to the mikvah, and then they have to bring sacrifices. There is the Yoledet, who was the woman who gave birth. She has a period of impurity. Then she goes to the mikvah and she brings sacrifices. And then there was the Zav or Zava. They have a period of impurity. They go to the mikvah and they bring sacrifices. And the last one who does that is the Metzora. The Metzora is the person with Tzorat. They have a period of impurity. They go to the mikvah, and then they have a whole sacrificial process. So this is one of those, and we've had that discussion. Okay, 105. That is, they commanded us that semen be impure. So if you just have one, this is not the Zav is actually a discolored discharge. This is just a regular discharge of semen. So let's say a couple are being intimate. This is a mitzvah. This is an actual mitzvah, but they still are impure for a day. Both the man and the woman are impure for a day. And this commandment includes the regulations of the impurity of semen. That impurity is reconciled by going to the mikvah and then waiting for nightfall. Nowadays, women do not go to the mikvah for this reason. Women only go to the mikvah for a menstruation, at the end of menstruation for nida. But there is a custom for men to go to the mikvah. There was an actual decree by Ezra that men who hadn't gone to the mikvah yet could not daven and could not learn Torah, speak Torah, until they went to the mikvah. This decree never fully took, but there's a very strong custom. Hasidic men go to the mikvah every day. There are Sephardic men and some Ashkenazi men who go to the mikvah every day also. But even amongst the ones who don't go to the mikvah every day, there is a custom they even associated with Ezra, even though again the decree is not held. But they will go to the mikvah the next day, which means which works out sort of weirdly, because there is a thing about going to using a bath on Shabbos. You're not allowed to use a bath on Shabbos, and certainly not a warm bath on Shabbos. But there are those who go to the mikvah every day. They end up going into the mikvah, and the mikvah is generally warm. So it's sort of interesting that even Litvaks who don't really go to the mikveh every day, they'll end up in a mikveh for this reason, because again, this part I know mostly just because I've seen the people going. I must admit, I have not entirely researched this part of the custom, which is people who don't go every day, but they go because of this like Takonos Ezra kind of thing. So it is the custom for men and women to be intimate on Friday night. So a lot of on Shabbos morning, I would see people go. There was a period of time where I went to the mikveh every day, and so I would see, people that were coming. Clearly, they were coming because of this Takonos Ezra thing, and they came on Shabbos morning to the mikveh. So that was sort of somehow that's okay. That whole issue of why it's okay to use a warm mikveh is a subject for some halachic consideration. But anyways, there is this is the reason why men end up going for the most part. There's mystical layers to this, but this is how it starts for men to go to the mikvah, is because of this reason. And this commandment, it includes the exact ways through which the Zava transmits. So the previous one was the Zav, was the just semen. This one is commanded that a Zava is impure. We talked about this earlier. She's having she's bleeding, and it's not her menstrual. It's not her time for menstruation, and it's not menstruation. She's bleeding, but it's not menstruation. It is coming, it seems to be coming from the same place as menstruation, but it's not menstruation. This is considered to be its own thing. It's called Zava, which means flow. This is a certain kind of impurity. And the way this impurity works is once she's a Zava, she has to count 7 clean days, 7 days in a row that she's no longer bleeding. And then at the end of that, she goes to the mikvah. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, she would also bring sacrifices. But nowadays, there is some effect of this Zava rule. Technically, if a woman is menstruating, she could technically go to the mikvah at the end of 7 days from the beginning of her menstruation. She technically doesn't have to wait 7 clean days. She could technically go to the mikvah from the beginning. So biblically, once a woman starts to menstruate, she would count 7 days. If at the end of those 7 days, she's no longer menstruating, then she could go to the mikvah and she is pure. So the entire nida interruption of the intimacy of husband and wife would be 1 week. That's it, 1 week. But early on, and we're talking before the Mishnah times, women decided to accept upon themselves the stringency of counting 7 clean days, which means that, let's say it takes 5 days from the beginning of menstruation until there's no more bleeding. You would only beginning to count the 7 clean days from that time when there's no more bleeding. So it ends up that really the interruption in the intimacy of husband and wife is closer to 12 days than it is 7 days. So biblically, and there are some people who I have heard that in certain circumstances, when women are, let's say were not originally careful about going to the mikvah, and now they want to be careful about going to the mikvah, but maybe their husband's hesitant or whatever. I've heard of instances where they're told, okay, just do a week, go after a week and don't wait the whole time. Again, it's a very strong custom for women. And amongst religious women, you do not see people varying from this, that they count 7 clean days after they no longer see the bleeding from menstruation. So amongst Orthodox women, it's really more like 12 days. But you could have situations where women are relying on the biblical thing, and that would be 7 days. So that's how the Zava makes her way, or the laws of the Zava make their way into the laws of today. There's no other, obviously the laws of purity and impurity are not germane, because we don't have sacrifices, etc. But as far as intimacy between husband and wife, they still could apply. All right, number 107, that is that he commanded us to administer the laws of the impurity of a corpse. And this commandment includes all the regulations of the impurity of a corpse. So if somebody touched a corpse, if somebody touched or was in the room, the same room with a corpse, they're impure for 7 days. On 2 of those days, they're sprinkled with the ashes of the red heifer and spring water. And then, so this is a type of impurity that has a unique, some of these do, and this is one of them, that has a unique formula that is part of the purification process, besides going to the mikvah and waiting. I am told by somebody that there is in fact a para aduma in Israel. That's what I was told by Aaron. Marty Zimmerman told me that his son Aaron actually went and saw the para aduma, that there is in fact a red heifer, maybe in Shiloh, possibly, or somewhere near Shiloh, that they have been working on creating red heifers using a genetic modification. And supposedly this animal was sent to Israel from the United States, and it's a red heifer. That's what I've been told. All right. Why would we care if there are ashes for the red heifer now if there's not a Beis HaMikdash? It is one of the steps that would be required, for instance, to bring the corpse. Technically, if nobody is pure, you are allowed to bring certain offerings. You're allowed to bring public offerings, for instance, and you'd be allowed to bring the Korban Pesach even if everybody's impure. But best case scenario would be to purify in order to bring offerings. So that would be one of the reasons that we care. Also, it is prohibited for Kohanim to become impure, even if there is no Beis HaMikdash. And certainly if they were impure, if there was a remedy, you'd want to use that remedy. So that might be another reason. And also we are looking forward to the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash speedily in our times. And so we would need the ashes of the red heifer in order to have a fully functioning Beis HaMikdash. And again, this is that time when we're focusing on the destruction of it, but also on what it is that we can do in order to enable the next Beis HaMikdash to be built. All right. So now in 108, that is that he commanded us and instructed us to administer the laws of purification water, about which they said that it renders impure in one way and purifies in another way, as is explained in the analysis of this commandment. So now we are talking about the waters that are included with the ashes of the red heifer. So the person who is sprinkling the water the Kohen who's sprinkling the water on the one who was in contact with the dead, the person who sprinkles him becomes impure at the same time that the one who's being sprinkled becomes pure. Now, he only becomes impure for one day, but he's still, this is what he's referencing when he said, about which they say that it renders impure in one way and purifies in another way, as is explained in the analysis of the commandment. And just sort of weirdly, that water can make a pure person impure just while it makes an impure person pure. You should know, now here's the review, that these 13 types of impurities, the counting of which preceded this, being the impurities of a carcass, of creeping animals, of foods and drinks, of a menstruant woman, of a woman after childbirth, of tzara'at of a person, tzara'at of garments, tzara'at of houses, of a zav and a zava, and semen of corpse, and of purifying waters. The purification of each one of them is written in the Torah in many verses, and with many laws and stipulations, as are written in the Torah portion of Shmini, Tazria, and Metzora, and Para. These four sections, and when it says para, it means chukat, the Torah portion of chukas. These four sections completely include all of these impurities. Moreover, the order of taharot, which is an entire order of Mishnah, includes all the laws of all these types and the analysis of each type. Now, tractate taharot, machshirin, and oktzin, these three tractates only contain the impurity of food, and that which is attached to that topic, and those laws from the types of impurities, the mention of which is relevant to it. However, they only appear contingently. Likewise, tractate Nida includes all the laws of the impurities of a menstruant woman and a woman after childbirth, and some of the laws of a woman after childbirth are also in tractate Kritot. And in tractate Negaim are the laws of the blemishes of people, garments, and houses. Some of these tractates, besides Nida, all of these are only Mishnah. We don't have Gemara for those ones. Tractate Zavim includes the laws of a Zava, and of semen. Tractate Olo contains the laws of the impurity of a carcass. Tractate Para includes the purification waters to render impure and to purify. No tractate was dedicated to the impurity of carcasses or the impurity of creeping animals. However, their laws are scattered in many places in this order, and the majority are in the tractates Kalim and Taharot, and likewise did they speak about many questions about these topics in tractate Ediot. We've already explained this order in its entirety in the commentary on the Mishnah, meaning the order of Taharot. It is a commentary that does not require any other book with it for any topic related to impurity. So it's just interesting. He said, again, and we have already explained this order in its entirety in the commentary on the Mishnah. In the commentary on the Mishnah, meaning the order of Taharot. So he is saying that his commentary on the Mishnah is complete, and there's nothing. You don't need anything else. It is. Everything that you need is there in his commentary on the Mishnah of Taharot. It is a commentary that does not require any other book with it for any topic related to impurity. You gotta love that when he says something like that. Okay, so next Monday, it is my hope that we will meet together on Zoom on Monday. I'm looking forward. I'm not entirely positive about that. So I'm very confident about Tuesday. Not as confident about Monday. Let's assume Monday, but I'll text you if something happens about Monday. But Tuesday, I'm quite confident about. Obviously, anything. All right. Be well, guys.
It's just Estelle, since it's just me and Estelle here, tomorrow's good in the morning.
Yes. Tomorrow's good.
That's very nice. Rabbi, just quickly, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Rabbi. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, no, if you're busy, go ahead.
No, go.
Yesterday I didn't have to feel guilty about going on Rabbi Hall's class because you had no
Yeah.
class. That's not,
Yeah, was it
Um,
good?
this class is about Judaism and democracy. And the reason I'm telling you this is because last night he talked about the fact that the death penalty in the Torah seems totally impractical. You would never be able to do it if you had a Torah, the whole thing. And so he discussed three people, the Maimonides, the Ran, and Abarbanel, how they feel about secular law versus Torah law, how much they can separate it and not. The king must be appointed so that there can be, a judgment that way. I mean, it was an interesting,
So he talked about secular law.
if it is secular law, it's still Torah law, but
I'm not sure. In other words, is specifically about the death penalty or just the law in general?
Mostly.
The
Go
law,
ahead.
that the law in general, secular law, is something that all the nations have, and that we should have too, except that it's not going to accord with Torah law because it sort of serves different purposes. Torah law is to make us holy, and other laws are for our protection.
Society to function.
So when
Right.
you say we're supposed to have it, you mean what we would call the law of the king?
Right. We need that in order. We have to maintain societal order, and a
Right.
lot of
So
times
let's say when it says that the people were lined up to speak to King Solomon, so he would be applying what you're calling secular law, which might be called the law of the king,
Right.
as
Right.
opposed to the law of the Sanhedrin.
Right.
Right.
Right. Well, yeah.
I'm sure that's part of the
And
subject.
he says in the conflict, he says that in conflict, but in a way, Torah is for an ideal society, whereas the king's law is for what you find in practice. Oh,
Right now, there is a place, and I'm sure he talked about this, but there are times when they're trying to bridge it. Maybe that's because there are no more, they were already in a time when there was no king. In other words, that would mean that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon are only talking about when there's no king.
That could be.
that could be, yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting. Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
But he said that his conclusion, that I guess the classic criticism of Rabbanu Nissim is that it gives too much power. It gives unchecked power to the king. The king is sort of unlimited. There's nobody that really can bring it except for the Navi, maybe.
Right.
And
It's interesting there. Again, there's I don't remember where this Gemara is, but there's a Gemara where I think it's a Gemara where Herod put down, he claimed there was a rebellion against him. This is when he was a governor. He wasn't a king yet. Maybe that's why he put down a rebellion, and he killed a lot of people. He was one of the governors. I think he was in the Galilee. And then the Sanhedrin called him to judgment. And when he came, it says all the judges hid under the table, except for Shammai. Shammai said, Herod, stand, you're going to be judged by the Sanhedrin. And then Herod, realizing there's going to be an actual judgment, fled and left the country and had himself made king. And then he came back. So
are you kidding? No,
what, you can't judge a king?
So I don't know, but this sounds exactly.
That's why Trump
sounds,
wants to be reelected.
Okay.
There you go. There might be a lot of comparisons to make here between Trump and Herod. So, yeah, but it seems like it would be germane to this discussion, that whole thing. But I have to find out where that Gemara is. Anyways, interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You.
All right.
Okay.
He's worthwhile listening to. I don't
He
like
knows.
him.
He knows.
I don't like him, but
I don't know why
respect him.
David, it doesn't take to him. I don't know what it is. He's
Aviva Sternberg liked it.
yes. And Linda, I can't wait to hear how that went. That's she went to New York. No, not a new girl. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, Rabbi.
All right.
Tomorrow
Be well.
morning. Be well. Bye-bye.
Good Chodesh.
Yeah. Good Chodesh.